Hello, friends, and welcome back to the show. Today, I spoke to Kristen and Maria of Wise and Well, a repeat guest, about their book, The Menopause Myth. And today, we learn all about the difference between menopause and perimenopause, why the rise of increased use of antidepressants and hot girls take Xanax movement might actually be a sex hormone deficiency, the problem of waiting until you're in menopause to actually do something about it, the difference in delivery methods for hormone replacement therapy, patches, pills, potions. Does estrogen actually help with gains for menopausal women? Why so many women are suffering with thyroid issues, and the future of hormone replacement therapy science, and finally setting the record straight that HRT does not cause cancer, and so much more. I love these ladies. They are a wise and well source of information. They bring the facts, they bring the receipts, they bring the passion, and I think you're going to learn an awful lot about something you might not know much about, which you should, especially if you're a woman. So let's get into it. Kristen and Maria, welcome back to the show. This is your second time on Radical Health Radio, and the first episode was so popular that we had to have you back on again to talk all things menopause, perimenopause, and talk about your new book that actually, by the time you're listening to this, is out live now, The Great Menopause Myth. So I'm very excited to hear about that from you. So you got it on display behind you there, Kristen, I can see. What
Yep.
is the Great Menopause Myth, or is that too big of a question? Where do we even start with a thing like that?
Yeah, there's quite a few of them. There's actually 10 in the book. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the number one thing, gosh, gee, Maria, how do we number them in the intro section? But essentially that menopause is all about symptoms. That's probably the worst menopause myth
Yes,
being
I agree.
promulgated right now. Then we have another theory of menopause is natural, therefore the body's going to adjust and you'll learn to adapt without hormones. Horrific myth that's hurting women. One of the ones Maria and I really like to kind of hit home to women is just because someone has a prescription pad and can write you a prescription for hormones does not an HRT provider make them. It's a very nuanced skill. There needs to be training well beyond a medical society's kind of doctrine, which unfortunately is where a lot of people kind of in this boom are hanging their shingle and they're calling themselves menopause doctors and menopause experts. And really, they're just sort of regurgitating the talking points and basic training of one of the major medical societies. So those would be kind of some of the top three. I think we really rip on testosterone being kind of sold as an adequate form of HRT for women. It can have a role, but it's not the only thing. And then I think the biggest last one, Maria, is what? That menopause just means the absence of menstruation and fertility. And it is so much more than
Yeah.
that.
It's just a small piece of it.
The one you started with, the absence of symptoms means that everything is a-okay. Uh, Tell me a little bit more about that. I find that interesting because that's where our mind goes. Right? If I'm not feeling any
Correct.
symptoms, I must just be thriving. Well, what's going on?
So we call that the great deception. We've got a woman who's say 50 or 51. She's gone through menopause and like maybe she's had really good lifestyle habits. She has worked out, she's gotten morning sunlight, she eats, optimal animal protein, 30, 40 grams per meal. Um, she sleeps pretty good. Okay. She still has changes going on. They're probably less than people who don't eat, who don't sleep, who don't, practice circadian living like that. They're going to be less, but that doesn't mean, you can't see like what the lining of her blood vessels look like. You cannot see tau deposition in the brain. You cannot see the stiffening of the blood vessels. So, yeah, that's and if I could kind of show you, we can't, but if we could show you our like client files on the 60-year-olds and the kind of just crossed over the threshold of 60, 61, 62, we hear this every week. It's just like, well, I was doing so great. And like the literally like it's just the bottom falls out. And kind of it really breaks our hearts because these women were unfortunately often told by their doctors you don't need anything, or even worse than that, medical society guidelines are for management of symptoms. So the lucky few women, because I don't really think it's a ton, but there are a good enough amount of women who don't have symptoms, they are wildly misled and kind of denied an opportunity to age better.
Yeah. I think too, we can spin it even into perimenopause because there's a lot of women, I think, particularly probably amongst your demographic of listeners, who they do have all the low hanging fruit really well dialed in. And so they're metabolically sound. They're likely going to sort of not be as aware of the palpable effects of the declining hormones during peri. And so many of those women think, well, I must not even be close to being menopausal yet because I'm not feeling anything, or my menopause is going to be really easy because I'm not feeling anything. And where that starts to hit the rubber to the road for us is that perimenopause is actually the best time to take action, whether you feel it or not. And so this comes down to understanding what's your optimal hormone levels, starting to track certain markers that can tell you that even though you might be still cycling, that monthly bleed isn't necessarily a sign of robust ovarian function. You might just have enough estrogen in the tank. You may or may not have ovulated. It's all sort of irrelevant. We're all women going through this change. The declines are happening. And once those hormones are declining, all those changes that Maria just talked about are also starting, even though you're still cycling. So
Mm.
again, this perimenopausal group, they need to pay attention now. It's unfortunately, postmenopausal women have been denied such care. We're kind of the loudest and angriest, to be perfectly honest, right now. But Maria and I wrote the book in part to say this is for all women. I don't care if you're 30. You need to understand what's going to happen, what's happening, or what has happened. Put
Mm.
yourself in a bucket. We don't care. We're all women. It's all going to happen to us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it's kind of like these things are creeping up on everyone. Nobody's escaping father or grandmother time in this case, right? They're gonna kind of, like you said, the bottom falls out eventually, and the more you can get ahead of this, the more important that is, and that starts in as early as possible, I guess. How would you define perimenopause? Is that an age, an average? Is it what kind of phase of life is this?
Yeah, we're gonna say perimenopause is the 40s, but it could be the late 30s as well, for sure. It is a little bit difficult to define. It's kind of often defined by presence of symptoms once again. So symptoms would be things like, the one of the things that catches women's attention is the menstruation changes, right? Instead of like if they have a 28-day cycle, like all of a sudden I came every 21 days, or I had a 21-day cycle, or I had a 40-day cycle. We will say this for the perimenopausal women listening, once they've had a 60-day cycle, they're deeply footed into perimenopause at that point. And I just like, I have a passion to speak to the 50-year-olds who are perimenopausal. Like, it's kind of a surprise, but it's amazing how different all of our experiences are. But we've spoken to women who are 53, 54, who tell us they're still regularly cycling. I'm like, okay, you're still perimenopausal just based on your age, right? And then maybe what they do is they go 10 months without a period. And then they have a period at that, say, 10 months, and you've got a 53-year-old. And here she's thinking, I need to go reset the clock because, and technically that's true. It's 12 months without a period that you become menopausal, but there is such an intense focus on this, and it's misleading women because they think that they don't have to pay attention, or they don't need to start HRT until like they've hit that 12-month mark. And their hormones are in decline. They're in decline. Even honestly, even if you're 53 and still somewhat regularly cycling. So ah, those women, that's a special case. We are trying to communicate to them till we're blue in the face here.
Well, and because what you said, I mean, the data is rock solid, whether you're functional medicine or conventionally medicine minded, it really doesn't matter. That 60 days without a cycle, just one episode of those, we know there are vascular changes started already. So even if you're 43 and you are 60 days without a cycle, or 53, 60 days without a cycle, your heart health is at risk. It just is, by factor of the fact that these declining hormones trigger genomic actions that we desperately need in order to maintain homeostasis in the body. When they start to falter, that homeostasis is broken. We start to have changes. As Maria said earlier, whether you can feel it or see it or not, it doesn't really matter. We know that the declining sex hormones are triggering them. So that changing menstrual cycle can be a really good sort of bellwether for folks to realize, like, I'm not having hot flashes, but boy, that cycle change started. I should pay attention. The hard thing is so many women right now are being treated with hormonal birth control, or they're getting ablations, or maybe they've had a hysterectomy, or they simply have an IUD. So suddenly we've taken one of these benchmarks off the table. There's no cycle change to direct them to pay attention. And that starts to concern us, which is why we're saying it doesn't really matter whether you have symptoms or cycle changes. Looking at your levels, even though they're erratic in peri, you just test a few times, you can start to see trends and patterns. If you're really truly that unicorn who feels nothing, that's great. You still have to pay attention. I suspect most of them are feeling something. They're just not attributing it to the hormone loss, right? They don't realize that the worsening anxiety or getting pretty bitchy at the family at night, or, a little bit of sleep onset or sleep disruption, or not being able to recover in the gym as well. I mean, these are signs also. So, we just want to get the message out that, like, doesn't matter what your sign is. We all going to go through it, and you all got to pay attention.
That's fascinating. I never thought of that, like in the case of the pill, kind of removing this internal warning light on the dash system that helps you go like, oh, okay, something's off here because
Right.
you don't have that other state to compare it to, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Then, so the decline is causing these issues. You said even if you don't feel them, it's causing like arterial issues and vascular
Mhm.
issues and obviously hormonal issues. So these are building and building and building. And then at a certain point, the rug is pulled completely under your feet. Now the hormones are gone completely. What is it about these hormones that we lose that actually contribute to declining health, whether it's arterial or whether it's, bone, muscle, neurological? Like, what is the function of them and why is the loss of them so detrimental?
Well, you have receptors for so hormones are one thing, right? It's the hormone is also called the ligand. It has to go into a receptor, and receptors are on every area of the body, from the optic nerve to the colon, to the immune cells, right? And so it's just that when that's not there, it coordinates our immune response. Um, things become uncoupled, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's why we get frustrated with this definition centered around menstruation and fertility, because some women will say, like, well, I ovulated last month. Like, I don't freaking care that you ovulated. Like, honestly, this hormonal decline is menstruation and fertility are just one aspect of what the interplay of these hormones are doing in the body. There's so many more things that they are also doing. And when women start to understand that, we were taught to kind of loathe our menstrual cycle, when in reality, that cycle was telling us that all ships are sailing, like all things are working. Your liver has enough LDL receptors to keep clearing your LDL and maintain a good lipid profile. Your bones have the right signals between osteoblasts and osteoclasts to maintain their density. And your muscles are not going to start shifting from fast twitch to slow twitch. You're going to maintain some sort of power feature in your muscles. Those are the things that also that menstrual cycle, or really the hormones doing their dance, are contributing to. And that's the piece that so many women are missing, is we focus on the menstrual cycle and fertility, and we focus on symptoms. And Marina are like, the menstrual cycle, yeah, sure, that's one thing that they're doing. They're doing so much more. I mean, the lubrication of our eyes. Women most of the times, are like, brains are going, what? When I have dry eye and my 44 years old, that might be a sign of some of my sex hormones on the decline. Yes, it might be. No, obviously, a lot of things contribute to symptom changes or different things in the body, but the primary driver of homeostasis for women is the beautiful, robust presentation and rhythmic dance of our sex hormones.
Wow. As you're saying that, I'm kind of chuckling to myself because you were gracious enough to send me an early print of the book, and I was kind of running through it, and it's disappeared. It's passing through my family now. My mom read it when she came out here on a
Yep.
vacation.
Love
She
it.
had a hysterectomy, so she's really fascinated by this. And then my mother-in-law's got it, but she's got crazy dry eyes. She's always putting Visine drops in and things like that. And I'm just like, huh, how interesting, because I don't think that anybody, unless they know this stuff, is attributing that to sex hormones necessarily.
Not
So
really.
I
No.
think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's why you both take such like a bullish stance on the importance of hormone replacement therapy, because I don't think you can just magically recreate these with a special supplement or something. So you have to replace what the body has taken away by going through this process. And if that's the case, Do you think hormone replacement therapy is something somebody should consider in perimenopause, or is it all lifestyle? And then when menopause hits with that 12-month cycle, then they do HRT? Where do you factor this in?
We're fans of when the hormones start to decline, which is in perimenopause, that's when we should replace them. And we do not believe that you should wait or that you need to wait 12 months to be like officially menopausal. Now you're postmenopausal woman, you can take HRT. I mean, I know for a fact we both wish we had started a little bit earlier than we did. Yeah, it would have
Yeah.
changed our lives.
And that of our children. Um, no, I think, lifestyle piece though, we don't want to overlook that because we're adamant that whether you're making hormones or taking hormones, you need to be a healthy vessel for those hormones. They are potent, powerful signals in the body. And if we are putting them into a body under stress, whether it's physiologic, psychologic, anything, we might have some aberrations in their signals and have some aberrations in how they, present. So, our attitude is if you're not quite having the symptoms, you're not quite ready mentally for HRT. I mean, let's be honest, you're 42 years old, your cycle's starting to disappear. You're like, whoa, I thought I had another 10 years. And there's we see this in the social, a lot of women are like, I'm not aging, I'm going to resist this sort of thing. And we're like, okay, that's fine. But at least make sure you've got all the big rocks in order. Be eating enough. Please stop starving yourself, be eating animal protein. Plant-based is not going to serve you long term. Be moving appropriately. Maybe CrossFitting 5 times a day is not wise at 42. We need to embrace restoration. We need to embrace recovery. Add in some power stuff because guess what? That's going. Box jumps would help us all. So, getting your stress managed, it doesn't have to be eliminated. It's a super stressful time of life. We have our parents usually need help, our children might need help, our careers might need help. There's stress. Learn how to offload it, learn how to mitigate it. Get outside, go ground yourself in the grass. Best thing I did when I hit 50, I got a puppy and he made me get outside every day barefoot at 5 a.m. And I told Maria, I'm like, I am sleeping so good lately. I can't figure it out. And then I'm like, oh, you numbskull. It's because you're out quiet all the time with this puppy and you're hitting the earth. So, there's basic things to do to help mitigate the ultimate impact, but ultimately to your question, only hormones replace lost hormones.
I love and really appreciate that you guys take such a strong stance for HRT, but also not just as a panacea that, hey, you've got to just do this and it'll fix everything. I guess the male equivalent would be these guys that think you can just jump on a bit of TRT once you hit 40 and you're going to get jacked. It doesn't work like that. You still need the foundations in place. And I follow you guys on social media in terms of you're always talking about healthy relationships to resistance training, getting in the gym, walking, eating enough. Man, that is such a big one, right? These, women out there fasting for 16 hours a day and then surviving off like 1,100 calories and a coffee and a scoop of collagen to start the day, and it's just not enough. And I'm just having in conversations day-to-day life just how many women I'd speak to now that seem to be struggling with thyroid issues and things like that. I'm sure there's all kinds of stuff in our culture from environmental toxins and stuff, but how much of just the impact of not eating enough do you think is contributing to this decline in female health and thyroid in particular?
Well, we think it's huge. I mean, there's a lot of women who'll be like, I went into menopause at 38 and I reversed it and I got my cycle back. And Maria and I kind of politely smile and say, actually, that's not possible. What you did likely is start nourishing your body. What you did likely is start to support your adrenal function. And that is what essentially restored the cycle. Because let's be honest, why would the body allow why would the body allow someone to be open to fertility if it is not being nourished and slept and managed and everything else, right? So it's typical. I mean, we hear about it all the time, let's say like Olympic gymnasts. They're not walking around with menstrual cycles. Why? They're like 4% body fat. They're training multiple times a day. They're young, they're not always eating great, etc. What we're seeing too often is women confusing sort of this hypothalamic amenorrhea or essentially starvation of the body due to stress in life and food imbalances being the same as menopause. They're not. Those are two different things, which is why we're so adamant that you've got to focus on those other things, because you could be someone who hits that intersection of you've really sort of jumped the shark in terms of your body. You're not focused on the right health markers. You are starving it. You are over cardioing. You're all doing these things, but you're also like 43. And guess what? Then your ovaries are like starting to sputter. So you can make it worse, but you can often prolong the inevitable by, or push off the inevitable essentially by starting to nourish yourself. And what's frustrating is, the microbiome is a huge kind of bellwether for some of the estrogen changes. We have estrogen receptors in the gut. There's all sorts of reasons for this, but we need a nice, robust, and diverse gut. We also need estrogen to signal insulin as to where to deposit fat. We know insulin is, kind of, my brain is kind of farting here, but pro-growth, anabolic. So essentially, we have this moment where declining estrogen starts to sort of stop communicating with insulin. Insulin doesn't know where to put this fat, moves it from the butt and the hips up to the belly. At the same time, the microbiome starts to change. And what happens when we get microbiome change? Reduced digestive function, bloating, all of this stuff. So now we have this term called menobelly, and everyone thinks it's, you're just going to take a probiotic and address it. And we're like, no, actually, you need to recognize that the microbiome has changed, and you're probably stressing your body a bit, and now you're throwing everything, cortisol belly, all the kind of stuff onto the top of it. So that plays into the thyroid, from that women start to see the belly and they lean hard into the fasting. They lean hard and they say, I can't go low carb because low carb tanks my thyroid. Maria and I are like, nah, that's actually not true. Completely debunked. What tanks your thyroid is poor mineral status and not replacing those carbs with another macronutrient. You're usually under eating. So it's frustrating because we get it. There seems to be, for some women, this storm of and cluster of things that happen around this time, but oftentimes they're contributing to it more than the sex hormone decline. So that's why we're really, really adamant. They need to wake up, start to investigate their daily habits, start to really nourish their body, and then get educated on the hormone piece, because that's coming too.
Very cool. Where does a person start on this journey if they are in this phase of life where they know this is coming? They listen to a podcast like this, so they're probably a little more proactive, a little more dialed in. They might want to just get an assessment of where they are at. Is it good to do blood work? Are you looking for certain things showing up? Are you getting hormonal checks, or are you just because I guess the bioidentical piece of hormones is matching to the level somebody needs, right? So maybe a big question there, but where does somebody start on this, and where do they go? Are they getting blood work, and what are they looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's filled with a couple of things. You will hear a lot of doctors say you don't need to because your hormones are fluctuating in perimenopause. And that is absolutely true. They fluctuate not only in perimenopause, but throughout the 28-day menstrual cycle. However, a couple of things. When we talk about not getting blood work in perimenopause, we're typically referring to, say, the level of estradiol or the level of progesterone. But if you have, say, a regular cycle, right, you can test your blood work. You can test your blood for two reasons. One is test in your 30s when you feel great, or maybe you still feel great at 40. Test on day 12 or 13. Do we have a nice, really robust kind of spike of estradiol, right? Because then, and I know it's really hard for people to kind of forecast ahead 10 years, but maybe that's the level that we need to get you at when we are doing HRT. I think you alluded to that, right? And then the people that kind of yarn on about don't test because it's fluctuating, again, they're referring to sex hormones, but we could test FSH, that's follicle stimulating hormone. Nobody ever talks about that. When that starts to creep up, I mean, if you hit 25, you're probably not coming back down. And even if you're menstruating, you can almost call yourself menopausal at this point. I know it technically doesn't go with the definition, but hear us out. And even honestly, even as you start to creep above 15, you want to keep an eye on that. You're getting close. You're getting close. So everybody who speaks about no hormone testing, nobody ever mentions FSH. And we think that's very valuable to look at 1, 2, 3 times a year if you can. If you're someone like me and Kristen, we do blood work 4 times a year.
At least. Yeah.
Love it.
And I think you hit on it, Maria just referred to it, like knowing, if only we could all have known what our hormone peaks were in our 20s and 30s, it would give us so much data to benchmark as our goalposts, in our HRT journey later. And that's called physiologic. That's what was the levels of a premenstrual woman. We know there's some averages. There's kind of like a nice, beautiful graph where it's kind of like the lower and the upper. But if you look at around the average level, second half of the cycle, so that would be the luteal phase, is about 150 picograms per ml. So at the very least, if you're not getting that on like day 12, ding, 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 things are starting to kind of fall. So there's that. And then, the bioidentical piece is choosing the form of hormone you choose to replace. That's a molecular mimicry issue. But that physiologic, again, why are we having, let's say, annual physicals with our physician and not timing them to our cycle day and then testing our hormones? That could literally change the course of women's health going forward, because now they would have this annual benchmark to be like, how are things going? And all of a sudden, oh, you might not even be aware of it, but guess what? Your hormones are in decline. Now we have a starting
Mhm.
place.
It's such an important point, that hindsight is amazing. And I think listening, if anybody's listening right now and they're in that phase of life, like listen to that and go and get it if you can, because it's going to give you so much data moving forward. And men talk about it all the time too. I wish I knew what my testosterone got to when I was 27, 28, because now I'm approaching 40 and I'm just shooting in the dark, it's pin the tail on the donkey.
Yep.
And we're taking a guessing game. And I guess some of the issues with the averages is, where are we drawing the averages from? And it's a largely sick culture, right? With a largely poisoned
Right.
populace. So it's great to have averages, but I don't know if the averages are optimal and all of that stuff. But is this something you do inside of a program or a community? Do you help people figure this stuff out? Can they bring these ideas to you and get some references? Do you help point them in the right directions of who can get this kind of blood work? Because you mentioned some of the conventional doctors are probably going to wave you out the office if you even ask for this stuff. Do you have a network? Do you have connections? Do you have resources?
A lot.
Thanks.
We have a lot of resources. Yeah, we have a 6-month program that we work with women in, and it's largely like education based. You really ideally need to know what you're getting into before you start HRT. When women don't, they often get a pellet, and that is a low guarantee of success. We'll put it that way, especially long-term success. And so you need to really understand your options and what they require of you. You need a good microbiome. It doesn't have to be perfect, but let's get a head start on that. Like we alluded to before, all the lifestyle things really do need to be in place for your best success with HRT. And that's why Kristen and I don't do like one-off consults. And I did like bunch of people ask me today on an Instagram post, like, what's your preferred delivery method? I'm like, not answering it because that's irrelevant what my preferred delivery method is. It's about what works for you, your lifestyle, your budget, your health goals. So, yeah, we do.
Yeah. And part of that we do test. I mean, that is in part of the program. It's not just sort of the education. We look at the microbiome with stool testing. A lot of people in this space right now are kind of crapping all over the Dutch test, saying that it's irrelevant, it's not helpful, etc. And we would say, correct, if you're just talking about looking at hormone volume. Blood serum is the best way to look at hormone volume. But what the Dutch test does tell us are two very important things: how you're using your hormones. So we're looking at metabolism and detoxification pathways, how you're methylating them, etc. Also tells us your adrenal health. And those two things are so critically important for good outcomes of anyone's health generally. Again, whether you're choosing HRT or not, if you are not methylating your hormones, even the little bit that's being made by adrenals, this is a reason we need to give it attention. If you do not have a diurnal rhythm whatsoever to your adrenal response and your cortisol production, we have a big problem. If it's shooting high all the time, we have an opportunity to get in front of it. If it's really low, we need to really undo some things that you've done. So we do use the Dutch, we do use the GI map. We also use blood serum testing. These are kind of non-negotiables as far as Maria and I are concerned in presenting a big picture to women. And then in addition to that education, they get the testing, they get protocols, they get multiple visits with us to really, hone in on the obstacles they might be having and just give them, some self-advocacy and empowerment to then take this to the next level. And we do refer them to a provider.
Okay, awesome.
So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Maria, you kind of took my last question and threw it in the garbage because before I could even ask it, because I was curious, like, what is the best form of delivery for HRT? Because you hear different things, right?
Yeah.
Patches, the pellets, I think they're like little rice things that even go in the skin or something like that. Is it a
Yeah.
tablet? Is it injectables? I'm going to guess it can vary, but what are some of the pros and cons of some of the different delivery mechanisms?
Okay, sure. So a major con of the pellet is that levels cannot be adjusted once you have it in. You cannot take it out once you have it in. It probably releases a large bolus up front. It wanes towards the end. It's not normal, like that's not physiologic. We want to try to get, I mean, ideally get about, a dose that is going to be the same from day to day for some types of HRT. There's going to be another type of HRT that is actually going to mimic a cycle, and then that dose is not going to be the same every day. So, oral. You have a whole cadre of physicians and nurse practitioners that are fans of oral estrogen because of its supposed supremacy with helping with lipids in the cardiovascular system. But, when you swallow estrogen and it goes through the digestive system, it creates more of a type of estrogen called estrone. And while estrone is not bad per se, we don't want a lot of that. We want to try to minimize that. And, you will still make some estrone even with an estrogen injection or a transdermal estrogen, whether that's cream or patch. The body will always make some estrone, but you will make more when you swallow your estrogen. And what's the problem with estrogen? Okay, so you just mentioned estrogen. Well, it hits primarily just the alpha receptor. Okay, an alpha receptor, it is growth, signals growth, and that's not a bad thing. You need a certain level of growth in the body to repair blood vessels, to kind of clear the tau protein from the brain. You absolutely need that. Growth is not bad. I know people think growth, they think cancer, but this is not the case. But we also need brakes on that growth. Okay, so we need growth, we need, deceleration, growth, deceleration. And the only one that really does that in a balanced effect is estradiol. Okay. And so that's why we are fans of transdermal estradiol and injection. And transdermal can be cream, transdermal can be a patch. Um, there are reasons to do, there are reasons to do one over the other, and that's really what the Wilkinson do.
Yeah. I mean, each hormone that we're talking about, because let's be honest, testosterone's really entered the conversation lately. And so estradiol, has its best forms of delivery. Progesterone has its own. So a lot of women might even hear Maria say oral estradiol is problematic. And then they'll go, oh my gosh, I'm taking a
Right.
progesterone
Yeah.
pill. We're like,
Right.
stop. She said
Right.
estradiol. Progesterone is perfectly fine to swallow. It's not the same as estrogen. So, progesterone creams and pills, great. Testosterone, right now, a lot of these online telemedicine platforms are dosing women with injectable testosterone. One of the most concerning things. It's like, really, we can all agree on pellets, but now we're going to inject a woman with testosterone. This is producing what's called supraphysiologic levels. We talked about physiologic levels, right? We have supraphysiologic. And a lot of women, they get early wins from that. They might get jacked in the gym a little bit. I hate to tell you, ladies, but it comes at a great cost. You might have a libido. We have a lot of women like, oh, my husband's thrilled. I'm chasing him all over the house. We're like, okay, but that's going to probably change. And the sad thing is in order to have that great of an effect on libido, testosterone has to be at seriously super physiologic levels. Well, guess what else, testosterone. Guess what else testosterone at those levels do to a woman? Changes your voice box. You can grow an Adam's apple. Your clitoris can turn into a mini penis. I mean, there are doctors who specialize in reversing the damage from
Signal.
supraphysiologic
Yeah.
testosterone. And the sad thing is some of those changes are not reversible. And we don't notice the voice box deepening until it's deep. You're not going to get that back, even if you drop the dose and whatever. And so these are the things that we have so much concerns with, is we've got this sort of great kind of battle cry, hey, HRT maybe should be considered, and then this really crappy execution. And women, again, are going to suffer, and they'll either blame hormones, right? Or they'll opt out entirely. Two things that just really sadden me and Maria. So each type of hormone has a preferred or beneficial delivery mechanism. Then you have to look at what is it capable of achieving? Can it get you to physiologic levels or not? Newsflash, not all of them can. And then can it be dosed in a way that mimics the cycle, whether it's a cycling of progesterone or it's the rhythm of estrogen and progesterone together? So there's lots of considerations for women to understand. And what, again, they come to Maria or they'll come to me and say, what's the best way? We're like, what the best way is what works for you. That is absolutely the biggest thing. So, we try and explain to women, this is why you have to know these things first. And, that you don't proceed until you know,
Right.
don't proceed until you know.
Find somebody who
Yeah.
knows what they're doing to not turn you into a little man with a giant Adam's apple and an impressive bench press, but probably not what anybody wants in the long run.
Yeah.
Speaking in terms of the gym and the performance, testosterone thought of colloquially as the male hormone and
Right.
estrogen as the female hormone. I've seen you speaking recently about how estrogen has a role in performance too. Explain to me how estrogen might be able to help women with performance and help you get jacked.
Well, okay. So, feel better mood, lubricated and not painful joints. I mean, we speak to so many women who are unable to lift the weights and do what needs to be done because they can't. They're in pain. It's the shoulder or knee or hip, what have you. So, you know, largely estrogen can deal with that. Is it always 100% cure? No, because it could be something else besides like the hormone receptor being the issue with that. But like I know for both of us, if we don't have a robust estradiol level, we will not be able to work out. We'll have frozen shoulder or knee pain or back pain or something like that. So, it just kind of almost just enables that as a possibility. And then just usually like the sense of mood and motivation and then I know, Kristen, if you want to comment on, when it's
The
yeah.
muscle architecture. Yeah. I mean, we have the type 1 and type 2 muscle tissue or fibers in the tissue. We do see a massive shift away from that power producing fast twitch to kind of the slow twitch endurance, which is why you see a lot of women start to lean into marathons at this stage of life and things like that. And I always think it's not 100% just the endorphins you're getting there, you're enjoying it. You're also seeing good performance in those marathons because now that's what your body's built for. And I thought I was a competitive rower. I suddenly kind of like hated sprinting, had to switch to head races and long races, and it was my happy place. Probably was a sign I overlooked, right? I was a really good sprinter when I was younger. I had seen a shift in muscle fibers and didn't realize it. We have changes to our connective tissues. This is a big thing. It's, Maria mentioned the lubrication of the joints, but also we have ligaments and tendons and things that need estrogen in order to maintain their flexibility or their stiffness or, their contractile kind of back and forth. That is so critical. And a lot of women will be like, I keep getting injured. We're like, well, there's your sign, So these things in terms of estrogen restoring that. I mean, I am, if I showed you my scars right now, you'd probably be horrified, but I was a high competitive athlete and I have all the scars to show it. I joke about that, but it was because most of my kind of top level performance and competition was in my 40s when I had no hormones. I've had my elbow rebuilt, my forearm rebuilt, my shoulder rebuilt 3 times, both of my knees rebuilt. These things I say to Maria all the time. I wonder, had I been hormonally replete, would I have been so susceptible to damaging my joints and my tissues and things like that? I went through a lot of reconstruction. I do blame the lower hormone milieu that was in my body for those sorts of outcomes. So for women, there is the recovery element. You recover better when you have optimal estrogen. You have the capacity to increase your muscle mass as well as change that muscle architecture. All of those things are going to be better with estradiol. So when we see these women just killing themselves in the gym and they're doing it in a low hormone state or they're on the birth control pill and they can't figure out why they're suddenly sort of skinny fat or their body composition is changing, sadly, many of them start working out more. It's an absolute diminishing return at that point. This is your sign that your muscles are starving for estrogen, your joints are starving for it, your connective tissues. You add that in, your ability to recover even from massive setbacks, is unbelievable. And you'll think, wow, if I'd only known all that time I put in the gym, all those hours in my 40s, it would have been a little different.
It's so, yeah, that's so crazy. It's kind of cool in a tragic way that you've been able to turn pain into purpose and reverse engineer this and be like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to teach other women how to avoid the same fate of probably what, 4 or 5 surgeries there, which is crazy. You've got the battle scars to show for it. But kind of cool
Yeah.
that, you can help other people potentially avoid this. And it's so interesting to me, to have the nuance of all of this stuff, because estrogen's one of those things that gets painted in modern culture as just like a bad thing, right? We're estrogen generation and estrogen dominance, and you don't want any of it, and it'll turn men into soy boys and yada yada. But there's clearly a method to the madness of the body producing this, and as it starts to decline, you're going to pay the price. Obviously, physically, that was the one you just talked about, but you mentioned something towards the end of that there, which is the neurological changes. And I was speaking to you guys before we got started, and you talked about perimenopause mostly being the neurological change. Let's talk about the mindset stuff, though. How is perimenopause like neurologically focused?
Yeah, there was a great article. I think it came out in Nature or Cell in like 2020, and it was like perimenopause is a neurological change, and that, that's the issue with hot flashes and, just usually profound mood changes. And one of those is one common one is anxiety. So you'll have women who could maybe were anxious types or just never really anxious at all. Like all of a sudden, like they're mid 40s and they're like they're going to the doctor like I can't deal with this. I'm so anxious. And doctor, most likely they're giving them an anti-anxiety drug, antidepressant drug. And the culprit is usually progesterone that has dropped. And usually, Steve, once progesterone drops like that, it's not really fluctuating more anymore. So it's just sort of like in this permanent, like it's just a stepping down. It's not fluctuating. And a lot of women will palpably feel that as anxiety. And that's because progesterone really kind of interfaces with the GABA calming receptors in the brain. And when the progesterone isn't there, what's the opposite of calm? It's anxious. So, yeah, and that can be pretty early on in perimenopause as well.
Yeah, I think too that for me, I'm not an anxious person, and I thankfully didn't have anxiety during my transition. But for me, it was the loss of kind of my cognitive performance. I used to call it my cognitive endurance. I just sort of couldn't perform intellectually at the same level I had. And I was a corporate attorney, raised three boys. I was doing all these things, and I kind of prided myself on being a super multitasker and having a thumb in 50 different pies at any given time and keeping it all going. And I truly could perform at those levels while, competing internationally and rowing and doing all these things. All of a sudden, the wheels started to come off that. And I was like, not anxious mood, but I was suddenly disturbed that, oh my gosh, I need a list to get through my day. I came downstairs, I got in the car, I have no idea what I was about to do. I started to feel just mentally fatigued at the burden of everything. And I'm like, am I burnt out? And I think we tell ourselves, these are always their stories we tell ourselves, I'm burnt out. Then I started to become very annoyed with my children and husband, to be perfectly frank. And women, unfortunately, at this time, they also start to isolate because this feeling of whether it's the anxiousness Maria described or kind of the lack of performance that I experienced, we start to question, like, what is happening to me? And it's a scary, vulnerable place to be. And, you're in your 40s, you're supposed to kind of get it by now, right? And so it's a little disturbing to go and say to your girlfriend, like, I do not know myself. Like, what is happening? Because you don't want to admit that. And then your spouse might be going, what's wrong with you? And in your brain, you're thinking, oh, honey, I wish I knew. But your defensive response is, nothing's wrong with me. And so it becomes this like really isolating time of life. And that unfortunately makes it worse because it starts to be kind of run a narrative through our heads like I'm losing my grip on things. And it affects marriages. We have a term called the gray divorce. It frequently starts to sort of, fall apart during these years and get worse as we get older. And that unfortunately should not be happening. Our society is going to suffer from that. Our, careers and employers suffer. Maria and I joke, but we're really only half joking that, our 7 sons definitely suffered during our perimenopause phase. And if I could go back and get back anything, I would take a hot flash. I would take the joint pain even. what I wish is I had that foundational sense of self during my 40s that I feel like sort of came undone. And that I think is something a lot of women need to understand. Again, beyond physical symptoms, there is that neurological shift that's happening.
And I wonder, there's this, I'm resistant to call it a trend, but it feels kind of like this, hot girls take Xanax and SSRIs are exploding and anti-anxiety and depression medication. It's hard when you get into these topics because some people are obviously really helped by these things and they genuinely need them. But I wonder if there is a big confluence here of these factors at play. And if you look at the demographics of use of those kinds of drugs, it seems to hit like and take off like a rocket ship as women hit in the 40s.
That's right.
There's a huge surge of SSRIs and things like that. And I'm now wondering, as you're talking, how much of this is driven by the change in the hormones. And of course, a lot of it, I'm guessing. I
Yes.
wonder if we knew more of this, we could get ahead of it and potentially get people off these drugs, which can help some people, but also can have massive negative side effects for other people too.
Yeah, I mean, I was offered an antidepressants and chose an IUD, ironically. Wish I'd never chose that either. But it was that time of life. Maria, I believe you were offered a benzo, right, when you
Yeah.
first went. Um, and for us, I think sometimes if a woman has had a baby, she can almost kind of reflect on what were those months, first year postpartum like, because we're at a really low state of hormones at that time. And frequently, that's a pretty good picture of what your neurological shift might end up being when you're in perimenopause. And, we've got clients who, one in particular, she's just been an incredible advocate for herself and for others. But, she had suicidal ideations. She was institutionalized 3 different times. She was on so many medications, both benzos and SSRIs, by the time she came to us. And obviously, Maria and I are not prescribers. We're not going to enter that kind of discussion with her. But in helping her understand where her hormones were and where her hormones could be and what might be the impact, she's now been working and she's off every single drug she was on. She has stabilized. She's not at risk of institutionalization. I mean, this is a woman who got her life back. The fact that she had to wait until her mid 40s for it is absolutely tragic. Most women hopefully aren't having that progression through their 20s and 30s that she had, but they might start feeling pretty vulnerable for it in their 40s. And again, this is where those hormones may actually be the solution rather than the meds. And we're not down on anyone taking pharmaceuticals. I'd rather have every person stay alive on this earth than harm themselves because of lack of medication. But at the end of the day, maybe there's a different option and we're overlooking the actual target.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's like the band-aid on the bullet wound philosophy in so many areas of our modern culture and approach to everything, whether it's, diet and taking a pill or now taking Ozempic or, you're not really addressing the root cause issue at hand. And these band-aids can help, but if you don't fix what's actually going on at a fundamental level, like understanding and coming to peace with the fact that at a certain point in a woman's life, her entire internal architecture is going to change dramatically. And that obviously has consequences that it seems like a lot of people are just walking around completely oblivious to until it happens to them and smacks them in the face. Then it's tough. It's really tough. So that's a hopeful message, I think, that people can start to think about it in a different way. It's not, you're not destined to the clinician's office or the psychotherapist chair. You could potentially, get ahead of these things. And of course, all of the other things, the lifestyle factors, the big rocks, but also understanding your hormonal architecture and getting on potential hormone and replacement therapy, if that timing is right for you, could be really helpful there.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the other things that I wanted to talk to you about is this myth that won't seem to die, that hormone replacement therapy causes cancer, essentially. It's very dangerous. Estrogen drives cancer. How can we put the nail in the coffin for this one?
I will die on this hill.
Yes.
I feel very passionate about this. If this were true, any woman who was pregnant and had whopping doses, ladies, we're talking 150 picograms per ml of estradiol is sort of being normal in the mid-cycle, average woman. We're in the thousands when you were pregnant, and yet you got out of that without cancer. How could that possibly be? Now, is it true that some tumors have receptors on them that are responsive to hormones? Yes, it's true. That doesn't mean necessarily that hormones, even in that environment, are inherently dangerous. What we know is that cancer is very multifactorial. We've got viruses, we've got parasites, we've got endogenous toxin exposure, or I mean, exogenous toxin exposure. We've got, blood sugar problems and inflammation, which can drive DNA changes at the cell. We have so many things that are at play. And fun fact for women, breast cancer genetics really are maybe 3% of contribution to breast cancer. So women need to understand that the highest rates of breast cancer tend to be in our postmenopausal years. How do we blame a state of estrogen deficiency, or how do we blame estrogen during a state of estrogen deficiency for causing that cancer, right? Cancer can be 10 to 15 years at work before we actually become aware of it. We know that women who take estrogen therapy actually do better in terms of mortality rates, better in terms of aggression of the tumor, and better in terms of recurrence. So, why we keep hammering this has to do with some bad studies, bad information, bad interpretation of the studies, etc. And we need to kind of take that conversation and dispense with it completely forever and ever and ever. Let's please let it die, and I'll be the one to speak at the funeral. We have to stop making women scared of their hormones. Our hormones are our superpower. Our hormones are what keep us healthy. Our hormones are absolutely the critical component of our genomic signaling in this body. Stop trying to suppress them. Stop trying to dump them, stop all these things. They are helping you. If you have something going on, you need to look again at what you just talked about, the underlying issue. Is it a poor gut microbiome? Is it you live next to, we had a woman who couldn't figure out what happening. Turns out she lived next to a farm that produced pesticides. Like that was actually the production, not that they used them, they produced them. You have to wonder about groundwater contamination. Like there's so many things in it. And it's very frustrating because women have either my hormones or I did something. And I am so frustrated with women being made to feel like they made a mistake somewhere down the road and that's what gave them cancer. It is not that simple. If it were that simple, we wouldn't continue to have the rates of cancer that we do in this world. We have made almost no progress in terms of preventing cancer, doing some better jobs in terms of treating cancer. We are not preventing it. And we have to get really realistic that hormones actually are a homeostatic regulator. They provide balance. They modulate the immune system, which is a critical component of cancer defense. They upregulate something called P53 tumor suppressor, which maintains a state of anti-cancer cells in the body. There's so many, our apoptosis, all these people who are out there like shoving themselves in cold plunges because they want to have autophagy or something. I'm like, guess what else does it? Hormones. So it's very, very frustrating that conversation continues to come up, but we're just going to be unapologetically unequivocal. It's not your hormones, period.
Period. If my mic wasn't attached to the desk, I would drop it because that was great. That was great. Clip that up. Let's go. No, it's interesting because that's something that always comes up whenever I talk to somebody about this. Again, it's that one very outdated, very poorly done study. I do wonder, hopefully, if the science catches up, that maybe there'll be more women moving towards HRT, and in the future we can gather cohorts of women that choose to go down this path versus women that don't go down this path and look at health outcomes. Are you aware of anything like that happening?
Yes, there's actually a grant proposal at the NIH. It's looking very good that it'll be accepted and approved that probably this coming November. And we're going to be doing a study that's looking at the current standard of care, which is low dose hormones only for symptoms and only for a shorter amount of time, versus a full physiologic replacement that mimics the cycle and really uses good hormones in good amounts. And we're going to do everything from looking at hippocampal volume of the brain, looking at breast tissue changes, looking at cardiovascular outcomes and markers, looking at so many things that are going on in the body and saying, where are women really benefiting and how is this happening? And where are we not preserving bone with our low dose patches, things like that. So yes, it's coming. I think people have to be realistic that we have a lot of pharmaceutical capture in scientific research today. And unfortunately, many of the drugs that are, I should say, hormone compilations that are able to provide women the best benefit are not commercial. They are compounded. They are individualized medicine. There's no patents in that. There's therefore no incentive for these to be promoted. And in fact, there's a disincentive to promote them. We want to continue funneling funds. unfortunately, a lot of these very loud menopause experts who call themselves the Menopausy and whatnot, they are also captured by Big Pharma indirectly because they are absolutely the bullhorns for the medical societies who are highly funded by these pharmaceutical companies. So, it's not to get conspiratorial. That's not at all what we're saying. I think we just need to be very realistic. If we didn't learn anything over the last 4 years, I hope we at least learned that research is imperfect, research is corrupted, and we are not being given the best research out there. We just aren't.
Yeah, you speak in my language. I love to hear that something's actually happening. And I agree, there's a lot of capture and there's a lot of corruption, and the incentives drive the current outcomes. And hopefully we can steer conversations to change the incentives and drive better outcomes. Is there anything that the audience listening can do? Is there a place to go? And is this something you could donate to or partake in or volunteer for or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few options. Once they open it up to setting up the two different cohorts for this study, they will be primarily patients of doctors at certain clinical sites. So that's a little bit already baked in. But, there's options for women to advocate for themselves with their legislators. Right now there's a big movement afoot to take that black box warning off of estrogen preparations and stop the whole cancer warning BS. That would be a great place to start lobbying. You can write letters, call your legislators, etc. And I would say also there's a huge push by some of those kind of bought and paid for Congress folks who want to get rid of compounding. Compounding is an essential element of delivering good medicine. Not everyone needs compounded products, but more people would benefit from them than we realize, and they can be the life-changing kind of opportunity for some people. And so going out and advocating for getting the federal government out of the pockets of the compounders. Compounders are already regulated by universal standard practices. They already have the components, the constituent ingredients that they use are regulated by the FDA. They already are subject to state pharmaceutical board approvals. So there's plenty of oversight. We had a couple bad episodes with bad compounders? Sure. Last I checked, we've had more than a few bad episodes with FDA approved drugs too. So, getting this sort of bullseye off the backs of the compounders and supporting them, this is probably going to be a large part of the future for hormonal restoration for women, and we need to support that.
Very powerful. Share this conversation, share this message, and buy the book. Buy the book, because I'm sure you talk about some of this stuff. So as we start to get ready to bring this one home, who is this book for? What's some of the things that you hope the reader gets from this book or will get from this book, and where can they go and get it?
It's for women, and it's for people who love women. So
That's you as well, husbands. Read, educate yourself. Come on.
partners, anyone.
Well, let's face it, yeah, the guys need to know what we're going through because otherwise they think their wife has lost her marbles. Yeah, and as Maria said, women, it's all women. We wish that public school education would include teaching girls not just about the menstrual cycle and getting pregnant, but teaching them about the menstrual cycle and what it's doing for their whole body health. So, anyone that has a female in their life or is a female, let's read this book and understand our hormones. Like I said, they're our superpower. They really are our future health span protection. We need to embrace them and stop, giving them horrible names and trying to get rid of them all the time.
So the book is called The Great Menopause Myth. It's available now, which is amazing. And where can people go to keep up with what you do on social media and look at your links to potentially get into programs and communities and
Yes.
stuff that you all have going on?
So we're Wise and Well. So our website is wiseandwell.me, and our Instagram is really our main social channel, is also Wise and Well.
Love it. Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you very much, Kristen. I love speaking to you. I'm learning so much when I speak to you guys, and I'm very thankful for that because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is going to go through these changes themselves, and hopefully I'm a little more up to speed than the average person now, and
lot
she
more.
is too,
Yeah.
by virtue. So this is wonderful, and I'm just so thankful that people like you exist in the world and are doing this and are willing to push back against some of the narratives and the broken incentives and all of it, and I know our audience greatly appreciates this as well. So thank you so much. Go keep kicking butt and being those wise, well women that you are. And you lot, we'll see you next week on the show. Peace out. All right, friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.